David Chalmers of the Liberal Democrat Party. Welcome to The Inquiring Cat Does Politics. So kind of you to give me some of your time today, David. You are a leading light in the Liberal Democrat Party today. How did that journey start? Was it right back in your student days, or what was the journey to get into the Lib Dems?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you today. I mean, great, good to see you again. We've known each other for quite a long time, but I don't think we've actually spoken since I sort of got involved in politics, I suppose. I mean, so I was always interested in politics at school. I did politics A-level. When I went on to university, some politics, current affairs. I studied at Edinburgh. I also did European law, which involved sort of history and politics. So I was involved in student politics. I'm not quite sure what party I stood for in those days, if any, none, I don't think. So it was always there as something that I was interested in. But of course, then when you life gets in the way, and I at one point had been a member of the Labour Party during the Blair years. In the late 90s, but more just a bit of a foot soldier, just giving out leaflets and doing things, not really engaged in what I would say in the policy of the party, but I supported them. And then I've spent a good 10 years over in Asia, in Hong Kong, with the Economist, and we were although obviously politics was hugely important and we had to be engaged and understand what was happening in the world, it wasn't really encouraged to be party political. And so I wasn't a member of a political party probably from early 2001, something like that. I then came back from Asia, so I was based out in Hong Kong and China. And that has actually been quite very useful understanding of that part of the world, especially the work I was doing in establishing a business in China for the Economist. We won the Queen's and Water Enterprise and things, so go back to that later on. But so that gave me a still an understanding of the world. I came back here and I got involved with establishing the Kaleidoscope Trust as one of the founders of the Kaleidoscope Trust, and that is now recognised as probably one of the world's leading charities, organisations, LGBT rights internationally. And at that time I was, we're talking, 2013, 2014, around that period. There was the coalition government here in the UK. And I was involved with people like Lynn Featherstone around, when she was African minister, around what should be done in Africa on LGBT rights. And I saw what the Lib Dems were doing with regards to the coalition, and I thought they were actually having a really good input into that. And they were getting a lot of criticism. But for me, I was like, no, actually, I'm witnessing this at first hand, that they were the ones who were bringing things up. Same-sex marriage, in the end, who agreed on it. But it was certainly that they were pushing the government and having, I thought, a very good influence in the coalition on the Conservatives. But I hadn't been a member of a political party for a long time and really hadn't, it's like I don't always agree with everything, and so you end up thinking, oh well, I don't agree with them on these things, so how can I be a member of that party? It's going to be difficult. I mean, you don't. You find the values of a party that fits with you, and in that respect, that's why I probably got to an age where I have a feel what drives me and what I think is important and what are the values. So that actually enabled me to look at the Lib Dems and I made the right choice, and it certainly does fit with my own values. So for me, the Labour was too much about telling people what to do, too much about collectiveness, whereas for me, the individual is hugely important, and the individual to be able to live their own life, without impact upon other people, as it were, adversely. But up to a point that people should be able to, and the individual is important in society. I think that socialism, Labour side downplays that, and that's where I see quite a big difference between us and them. Obviously, for me, the Conservatives and the right wing take it too far. So, because I do believe there is a collective community society that we're part of.
Yeah, I don't think the Conservative Party has ever quite managed to shed the Margaret Thatcher comment
well,
that there is no such thing as society.
I'm painting a very simple picture here, because there's obviously people in different parties always going to disagree, and we all and actually agree. So there are people who from the old Conservative Party, like Dominic Grieve, who I meet with, and think he was a very astute politician, a lot of integrity, and we have a lot in common. So, but then there are others that don't. So that I'm just trying to give you why I ended up in the Lib Dems, but it was actually a bit by chance, because I was living down in North Devon at the time, and I'd moved down there, and it was the elections were coming up. So the general election was in the May of 2015, but there were also local elections. And I just said, oh, look, I don't mind helping out a little bit. I'll deliver some leaflets and things for you. And that was fine. And then where I lived, the ward that I lived in, I was asking, so who's going to be the Lib Dem candidate? And I've been told, we're not thinking of putting up a candidate because we've got some independents that we work with, and this again is something. This is why I have a huge adversity to independents. We can go into that if you want to, but anyway, so it was like, I was thinking, well, okay, all right, but so people don't get a chance to vote for Lib Dem in my district, but we got to vote. We're supposed to vote for these independents, and the more I looked at them, I was thinking, not so sure about this. Well, about a week before the election, the deadline was called. Both independents, one joined UKIP and the other would join the Conservatives. And so I thought, well, there I am. My fears are always, that I was being advised to vote for them. And these two people obviously had nothing in common with the Lib Dems. And we were like, oh, what are we going to do? We need candidates. So I stood with people saying we're not going to win this because it's one of those seats that we're not likely to win. When it came about, I had to join the party to do that, so that's when I joined. That was 10 years ago, March in 2015, and I stood and lost by 10 votes.
No!
Yeah.
Oh, I should just say for our listener, I know you probably think that some, maybe indeed all politicians are barking mad, but when you hear the bark, under the desk here is Archie the dog, and he's quite ancient, needs a lot of love and attention, and he might just woof at us occasionally, but don't worry.
Well, Archie is my secret, he's been my companion through all political campaigns. He's always featured hugely on all my literature when I've stood for Parliament or whatever I have. Some people have said, well, some politicians have an umbrella. You've got Archie. He is well known. So anyone who knows me will know Archie.
As an ex-PR man, you'll also know that people, if you've got a puppy or a pussy, people love it. You've got the puppy, and I've got the inquiring cat, the pussy, and it's a great way of attracting attention. You talked about independence, of course. This last week or so, the Labour Party have got a few independents because they had to kick out these councillors and a minister, and sometimes independents don't expect to be independents, and they become independents as a result of their own malfeasance.
Yeah. No, but I did get elected to the parish council. And so that is actually, I always say to people, never underestimate the value of town and parish councils, because they have a really important role to play in our democratic sort of system here in the UK. Go into that later on, but even with the reforms that Labour are putting forward at the moment on unitaries, but me and others in the Lib Dems, we are concerned that they're not giving any thought at the moment on how to, because town and parishes are probably going to take up some of the slack. They will do, right? But what is being done to ensure that there is better governance, people being elected, support for them? No thought to that whatsoever. So it's one of the things again which, for us as a party, we will be raising that in Parliament, and we will probably be putting in amendments. We'll be saying, fair enough. You want to. The argument around unitaries, bringing districts and counties together, I think there is an argument for that.
You don't think it's a stitch-up to avoid reform suddenly sweeping the board this year?
No, because I'm on a district council now, And I've been on town and parishes. I was elected, I was chair of the Devon Association of Local Councils, which is the first Lib Dem, God knows how many years to have that position, for all the town and parishes in Devon. I was the representative on the national committee of that at that level. So I've seen, experiences. They're good, but they have challenges. They need better support. The fact that they're bringing in changes to the local government system around the unitaries, and I think that so long as they don't get the unitaries too large, because the whole point about districts was that they have a connection into local issues.
Yeah.
But if they make them too large, then they'll lose that. And you could say put somewhere. I mean, I'm going back to Devon, but if you put, say, North Devon into a council with Exeter, North Devon isn't going to come out very well on that. But if you put North Devon into a unitary with, say, Central Devon and parts of West Devon, so it needs a bit of thought, and then you've got the lower level below that. And so we're not opposed. I don't think that the party is opposed to some of these changes, because for the public out there, they are often like, which council is it? Oh no, it's not us. It's that it's the county council that looks after potholes, but we look after your bins, and they don't know, and they just feel that it's a bit like a way of.
Is the current structure with these different layers?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got more chief executives, more HR managers, more everything.
Well,
presumably it's not very cost efficient, the current structure.
No, it isn't. That's the other thing. I mean, that's going to have to be looked. But yeah, you're right. But don't go if they go for too big and they don't actually think about how town and parish councils are going to come into this, that could be an issue. So I have always, over the last 10 years, I think there's 1 year in the blip when I wasn't, I have been a parish councillor, town councillor, a mayor. I was mayor of Northam during the pandemic, and now I'm a district councillor for last year, and I'm standing in the county in May. So local politics has always been a really important sort of factor. It's how I feel that I have keep my finger on the pulse of what people are really thinking about. Otherwise, you start talking about, especially with my work on the international side, that you sort of get lost in what Mrs. or Mrs. Brown might think is important. I mean, these are important. Yeah. It's a bit of a grounding. So I think it's good to keep the balance of both.
Matthew Parrish wrote an interesting piece in the Times some months ago, and of course he himself was a Tory MP, and he made the point that basically all MPs are odd people because they come up through the party structure and they gradually get more and more promoted, and they start to believe their own publicity because of that. Yeah. And they get more and more remote sometimes from the actual electorate and what is driving the electorate's emotion. Yeah. And they start to believe that everything comes out of their own mouth is sort of God-given fantastic news. And that's when they lose connection with the local population they're supposed to represent.
And what is important we talk about our recent election that we had back in July last year, and you tapped on the campaign. Happy to talk about that. For us, what we're finding is, and this is my role internationally, with so liberal parties tend to like to think of themselves as we have to talk about explain the intellectual side of this. And one way I'll put that is if people start talking about the environment, most electors switch off. You start talking about the sewage or the dirt in the rivers on the beaches and how it actually impacts on them, people will understand. You start talking about fiscal rules, debt break, blah, blah, blah. People go, what are you talking about? If you talk about cost of living and how that actually impacts, it's how you put your message across. Yeah. And that is something which at the moment in my role I'm looking at, we've got election coming up in Germany next week, which is really interesting on that sort of thing.
So unwrap your international role a bit for us.
So I stood for three times in Parliament, twice in Torwich and West Devon against Geoffrey Cox, which is very interesting, and second place.
Did he just out megaphone you? Did he out megaphone you on the campaign trail?
I always remember the first time I ever met him. I was a bit sort of like, oh my God, intimidated, because there's this man and he's No, attorney. Well, he became the Attorney General later after that. But he's one of the country's top lawyers and whatever. And Jeffrey is terribly.
I don't know what you mean.
And we challenged one another, and actually we I think hopefully there was a bit of mutual respect there. I mean, I think that the man is not, we fell out, I suppose, over the whole sort of Brexit, because when we were debating at times he would say, I'll go over, I remember him saying this to me, I'll go over red hot coals for us not to leave the customs union or the single market. And of course then he changed and forgot that he'd ever said that to me.
Yeah, well, collective responsibility.
Yeah. No, so I stood against him, which was came second in 2019, and then just at the last recent election, I stood against Steve Barclay in North East Cambridgeshire. But in between that sort of time, whilst I've been on local government, 2 years. So I was chair of the European group in the party for I think it was about 5 years, all through the sort of the Brexit. After the referendum, but in the sort of the period of what was sort of happening and things. And that in the party is a way for, we have different organisations in the party that allow people to talk, discuss. You can put forward ideas about policy, but it's more that you can talk around certain issues. So the European group is very active. I mean, I took 2 years ago, a group of us over to meet to Germany for 3 days, where we were wine, dine, met with the FDP, trying to understand about German politics and the connections with our sister parties and things like that. So that gave me quite a significant role within the party to be doing that. But it isn't actually it's more of a group of you working side by side. So last night I was at the Chinese Lib Dems, Chinese New Year dinner. There was a group in the party for Chinese members and putting forward around Chinese culture and supporting them.
Yeah.
So there were groups like that within the party. The European group was the one that I was chair of. And then every 3 years in the Lib Dems, we have what are called the federal elections. And they are elections to different bodies. So there's a body that oversees our conferences, which is the conference committee. There's a body that looks into our policy and every 2 weeks meets to discuss different policy areas and brings in experts and how that gets worked. Because the way that the party works is that any policy, whether it comes from our parliamentarians or if it comes from policy committee, has to go to the conference, put forward as a motion and voted on by members, every member one vote, and that then becomes policy of the party. So it's very much a members having a very strong voice within what is happening in the party. I stood for the Federal International Relations Committee, which ensures that in our foreign policy there's a way of contacting the members and for them to be heard on certain issues, and certainly in between conferences, because the conferences only take place twice a year, the policy can be sort of developed. And I got one of those places, and then I was elected as chair of that committee.
And I know you've travelled quite a bit recently.
And it's every 3 years. So I'm up again for election if I'm going to stand in September of this year.
Yeah.
There are various sort of bits of the party that are included on the committee that I chair. So from parliamentarians to the youth wing of the party to the different Scots, Wales, and I have. So it's very important that we have sort of discussions and with our parliamentarians, etc. And it's how much sort of influence do we have. So we worked very closely on putting together over 2 or 3 years of policy towards China, which, as I say, my experience of living in China and worked there in Hong Kong actually became quite useful in that respect. And that really set us apart from other parties. We were talking about what we should have a policy on China way before the Conservatives or Labour.
So just on that, let's just touch on, because inevitably I can't sit here without discussing the big Mr. T, dear Donald. Yeah. And I'm no great fan of Donald Trump, I have to say.
No.
But I, rather like you said earlier in this discussion, that you don't have to like absolutely everything about a party.
No.
Donald Trump, to my mind, did two great things in his first iteration, in his first presidency, and many of my left-wing friends nearly have to clutch the pearls when I say it. But I say, number one, holding NATO to account. I think it's a disgrace that I was told in a defence meeting I was at a few years ago that even back then the US was subsidising the UK alone defence budget by $5 billion a year. Well, that's why is my cousin sitting in Ohio paying for my defence? It's crazy.
Yeah.
And the second thing was actually confronting China, because China had always asked to have 50% of the company or shares or patents or whatever, and they'd just been getting away with it for years. So I thought that was a good thing. And of course then my pearl-clutching friends were going, how did you say that Donald Trump ever did anything well? And I said, well, I tell you what, Hitler built great motorways. Well, that nearly sent them over the edge for things. What's your view on China?
My response would be that good people do bad things. Exactly. And bad people do good things.
Well, that's what I've always said.
And, I just said it to someone the other day. You said Hitler built motorways. I said Hitler liked dogs and was a vegetarian. What is that? You look at however you want to.
You do realise now that people are switching off all over the country.
No, but we. So the issue that we have, and this is something which now in the party is very, very much sort of focusing our minds, is how we should respond to the Trump coming back in.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be sort of like, as a part, we're not in government. So we understand where, the British government has got to be able to, certain things it needs to do, but we are a little bit concerned over some of the language that is being used in almost trying to sort of whitewash anything. Suddenly Trump is, always got a sense of humour and I like having dinner with him. I think we have to be wary of what he sort of stands for. Where we're coming from, we still regard the fact that the other night people were talking about how and we have very strong links with Democrats, I have to add.
Yeah.
So the Lib Dems very, very close. And this is the other part of my role, is international relations with what we call liberal Democrat parties through Liberal International around the globe, and also through ALDE, which is in Europe, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats across in Europe. We are big committed partners to those. We have meetings regularly. We've got members on the bureaus of those who have helped to make sure that we've got elected. So all of that is hugely important for us. And we are trying to get our head around how we are going to sort of respond to Trump.
Yeah.
And one thing that we mustn't, from where we start from, is that if the US system was really robust, and this is from the judiciary, and everyone says, "Oh, don't worry, it'll be enough to sort of withstand anything." We don't feel that way. We think it's already lost. It's lost out, because the fact that he should be in prison, and those people who did whatever they did, tried to overthrow the result of the previous election, it failed, because we all know that he led to that sort of insurrection. He didn't want to accept that previous result, and should, in a normal system, a democratic system, have been dealt with, put in prison, dealt with. But as he was, he's been put back into power. Now that's a failing. That's the Americans can do that, but we have to actually also look at those people who didn't vote for him and what's happening in to their democratic system, and can we regard the US as an ally, as a reliable ally? We're seeing these threats being made to so the threats towards Denmark, to Panama, and if you don't do what we want, we'll just take that from you. Gaza, for instance, and you could say, well, he doesn't really mean it. Go forward and you look at what's happening in the world elsewhere. People look towards the US and think, well, if he's able to do that,
some people are saying he's copying Putin's.
Well, let's not even go, because with Russia, but what's happening just in this last few weeks with Rwanda, Rwanda has literally walked into we know there's been supporting rebels, whatever, but now they've actually gone in and taken a huge slice of Eastern Congo and are basically just saying, no, well, we're doing it to support people in that area and whatever. But it's the reasoning is, if you look at it, is because, well, if the US are able to get away with this, we will be able to get away with it too.
It's what Hitler did in the Sudeten and it's what Putin's done in Ukraine and the
so
Donbass.
We have to be, and the other area that we're very concerned about is what is happening to trans people in the US, who are basically at the moment being, told that you can't be. We've heard of people having their passports taken away from them. There is concern of anyone trans going to visit the US from the UK or from another country, that they will not be recognised as, in their own passport, female. You were born a male.
There's some very complex things to come out of the
No. So there is. So this is where we would be, and we can do this because we are. You said what is a Liberal Party? The Liberal Party has a going to be the voice of reason, as it were.
So that's the purpose of the Liberal Party today, you think?
Not the only purpose at all, but it's certainly one where we are at the moment, that we can make sure we can, like with the government, we're nudging them in certain areas. You picked up on something earlier about the how bad productivity is in this country. Let's go there. Yes, it is, and if you really look where it came from, there's been, we've had how many years of Conservative government and mismanagement. Labour's only been in for like 6 months, so you can't put all the blame on them. But we are disappointed and we are concerned that they've got an opportunity to try to bring about what we would say is change. Part of that would be developing a closer and a better relationship with the EU, our closest trading partner. That is not about rejoining, because that boat sailed. Whilst we as a party and individuals would all say we'd love to be back as part of the European Union, it's not happening. It's not on the table. But a better relationship is, and we've put forward the youth mobility scheme, which is right. So that doesn't bring much in. It's already there. We've got youth mobility schemes with Japan, Australia, Canada. But next door, where people of our age, I studied German at university. I was able to.
But is that because the EU is blocking it as a retribution of Britain, and it should now ease up that the Conservatives have gone?
No. Before the general election, the EU actually offered it to the UK. The Conservatives said no, and the Labour said no straight out. I can understand timing just before general election. We've said to them when I've had meetings with people in the EU, it was stupid. It was not the right time, because they were going into a general election. They were being very careful about anything.
Yes.
We were very careful about our language, which was that we wanted to develop a closer relationship with the EU. It went no further. So we would, as I've said, we would like to see ourselves. I would love to see us rejoin, but it's not happening. It's not. In
a recent YouGov poll, 3/4 of 18 to 25-year-olds say that leaving the EU was a mistake. Now, if you're 18 to 25, you couldn't vote when the Brexit vote took part.
No.
And I wonder whether they understand why some people did vote for Brexit. So, for instance, I voted Remain. I don't mind declaring that.
Yeah.
But if I had wanted to vote Leave, a big factor for me as a businessman would have been that the damn organisation's not been properly audited for years. Mm-hmm. And the big bureaucracies always, it doesn't matter whether it's in corporation, politics or anything else, health service, they create monuments of waste and fraud and theft when they're not audited properly. Yeah. And that would be a real concern to me when people now talk about rejoining, apart from the fact I have views on the euro anyway, which would stop me wanting to rejoin, because we'd probably have to be in the euro.
No, there's...
But why is it not audited? And when will that ever be tackled?
Right. So, I think you're quite right on this sort of like... majority of people at the moment, they say, 70, I hear 70% say that they think it was wrong, whatever. But if you actually then ask them about rejoining, it just falls away, because none of us want to go through that trauma that we've been through. So the reality is that we've left, and I agree there are problems with the EU around things. I still think, from where I come from, that it's much better for countries to be working together and working to try and find a way forward, etc., and deal with some of those problems. There is a huge issue around the bureaucracy in the EU. I totally agree with that, and the more we're outside, I see that now. I see that these unelected bureaucrats do sort of feel like they can run everything and push us around because we're, and they get angry because our government is talking to other countries like the Germans, like the Poles and whatever, getting support for a position that when they then come forward to talk to the EU that they've got, because one of the problems with Cameron was he had no friends in the EU. So when he was talking to these bureaucrats, the other countries, he had no support, and it all just fell, things that he wanted to try and bring about. Nobody was like, we're not prepared to listen to you anymore. Starmer is being sensible and doing all of that.
Yeah.
I agree. But if you actually said to people, go back, it wouldn't. And I can't see a referendum and all that sort of, the toxic...
I don't think anybody wants
so let's
that.
park that over there. But a better relationship, surely, is what we can do. And if we've got these youth mobility schemes, and we're talking about something for 2 years, 18 to 35 year olds, being able to do what I did, go over and work in a bar in Berlin for 3 weeks or whatever, and come back. Or as I did do before I went to university, I worked in an old people's home in Berlin, learnt my German, and there was a young group of kids who were saying, "Oh, and what do you do at partying?" I said, "Well, of course I did. I enjoy it. It was part of my life. I've still got friends from that time. It helped me then." There's so much, we've taken that away. And for me, it's like, this is a quick win. Let's just do this and start bringing some...
And it's not, I don't think it's party political, actually.
No.
I think it's about having an interest in the youth of the country, rather than any political issue.
Well, so the Lib Dems have been bringing this up in Parliament, and we had a 10-minute rule bill on it. I think there's a lot of Labour who would support it.
Yeah.
What I did was that 2 weeks ago, I brought a motion to North Herts District Council and showed that there were 26,000 young people between the ages of 18 and 35 that would benefit from this scheme.
Within that county?
Within this district.
Yeah.
Within this district here of Letchworth and North Herts. And that the hospitality business here, I mean, the figures were that it would help the hospitality industry, help tourism, all of this thing. We had a debate on it. It's a Labour-run council here. They had obviously been told to vote against it.
Because it came from a Lib Dem.
Because it came from the Lib Dems. And it's not their policy at the moment, Labour, to support it. They don't want, they're sort of sitting there. They haven't said they don't want to support it, but they're... the leader spoke against it. It was pushed back till midnight. So I think it was quarter to midnight. So we talked about the most boring... detailed on amending text on something or other, which to the point, because they wanted it to sort of like fall out. But we got to the point and we had the debate, and in the debate, even the partner of the leader of the council stood up and said, I will not be told not to vote for this. And Labour councillors stood up and made the most eloquent speeches, and we passed the motion. I think there was only 2 against, and there was a few abstentions, about 6 abstentions, but apart from that, all the rest of us voted for it. Now, the Conservatives were arguing against, they argued against Erasmus and the developing with universities and whatever. And there is a problem there because there's money involved with that.
Right.
And if one of the things the EU wants to do on that with Erasmus is to say, well, yeah, we'd like our students to come over and they pay UK fees. The British government, that will be a big hit to us.
Yeah.
I understand that. That's negotiations. That's a stumbling block. That's why we've said, take that out and deal with that, because that's a longer scheme.
Yeah.
But the youth mobility scheme doesn't have to have any of that in it. It's so easy. You've got the blueprints there with these other countries. Just do it. And Labour at the moment can't even bring themselves to
So
do
let's
so.
let's swing back into UK politics. So,
Yeah.
2014 election.
Yeah.
Ed Davey throwing himself off surfboards into the harbour.
2024 election.
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. I'm so in awe of your presence, David. I've lost track of the year.
No.
And I thought that was a very interesting strategy because you have the two big parties fighting like cat and dog.
Yeah.
And then how does he get oxygen? So he was doing these stunts, and actually, I think people rather liked him for it, and it gave a personality to the party. Could in any scenario, for instance, an alliance of the progressive left, maybe, could Ed Davey ever be Prime Minister of Britain?
Well, I'll go back to where you started from. So I'm on, for my international role, I get a seat on the policy committee. And we worked over 2 years, and I said meeting every other on Zoom, meeting together, looking at all different sort of policy areas. And I'm going to say, these were actually the response came back saying that Lib Dems had some of the best policies. But the problem was that we only had 14, 15 MPs, which means you don't get much television coverage, the media. And I remember even running up to the election, we were like, but how are we going to get this across to people? Now, we talked earlier a little bit about how the messaging of it. So, if you don't talk about the environment, talk about, sewage on the beaches and the rivers, because that's how people can sort of relate to it.
Yeah.
This sort of intellectual up here compared to, really trying to hit upon what people feel is important to them. But again, it was like, how are we going to get this across? None of us were aware. It was where it was done, and a decision was made that actually there was a way of being able to get the media's attention, like going on a paddleboard, falling off the paddleboard. But then what Ed did was that he then talked about the sewage going into our waterways, etc., going down a slide. And having fun with young kids. He was then able to talk about what should be done to help young people with mental health problems.
And he's got a personal backstory that's very powerful.
Yeah, so exactly. So part of my role is dealing with the ambassadors and high commissioners and whatever. So I arrange for them to meet with parliamentarians. They come to our party conference. I lay on a big sort of programme for them, briefing them on our policies, etc. So I meet a lot of them. And Phil Goff, he was the Foreign Minister for New Zealand, and he is now the High Commissioner here. He was at one of our events, and he said to me, this is like the year before, he said to me, do you realise what an asset you've got in Ed Davey? Because it's a real story. This is not something he's had to make. This isn't made up. His story from struggling as a young man and being a carer, and his parents and his grandmother and his siblings, and now his own child, who's 24-hour care, that gives him a real sort of authentic message, which a lot of politicians don't. Absolutely. And I remembered that, and I think that's what the party realised, but it could have gone wrong. So then when it started out, I'm not saying that there was a lot of people in the party who were like, this is absolutely the wrong way. This isn't how we get our message across. We're the intellectual party, blah, blah, all of this. As it was, that it was very carefully managed to the point where
I think it worked.
And it did. People talk about it now as one of the most successful election campaigns. We know, for instance, like our sister parties around Europe are looking at us and saying, can we follow on something from this? And the answer that for me is it's not about the stunts and whatever. You want to do that because you can fall into that, and you need the person to be able to do it. You've got to have an authentic message, but you've got to find a message that actually resonates and shows that you're listening to the voters. Now, the Germans at the moment in the FDP, I've been there the last few days. They're talking at a level up here about debt breaks and how important, one plus
that's
two.
not the language.
But the people on the street are worried about, about the far right and about infrastructure. So everywhere you go in Germany, infrastructure is basically falling apart. It's unbelievable. I almost missed my train to the airport. just 4 days I was there, there were 3 particular incidents where trains sort of broke down and I had to get taxis to get home or almost missed a flight. That was just me. And people say to me, this is almost all the time. Well, there needs to be some way of Germany being able to find a way to do that.
Now you talked about listening to people with Ed. So people have said that when Starmer started having a clear out of the Labour Party post Corbyn, because he was listening to what the country wanted, that some of those disaffected left wingers left the Labour Party and came to the Lib Dems.
No.
Do you think that's true or not?
No, not at all. They went to the Greens. They didn't come to us. We haven't got any, there was no real attraction to them because we're not an authoritarian party. We're very much a party that you have to sort of, so I get, this is not liberal, but I make sure that we have the biggest debates and biggest arguments that we can put, and people have their voices heard. We then try to find a consensus way through, and then we unite around that and go forward. There's no real way that I can, or anyone that I can see tries to sort of like tell people what to do. You're going to get, if you tell, but Labour does. Labour likes to, it's very much top down. And actually the Greens do as well. The Greens are very authoritarian joking about if any Greens listening, we joke about being Stalinist because they really are. And they take it to such an extreme, which is why, the environment is hugely important. I think it's like 53 of our MPs are what are called Green Lib Dems. So when we're talking about different groups within the party, they see the environment as hugely, hugely important. They will bring it up in Parliament, they will push for it, internet. But we also understand that you've got to work in a society, and that perhaps what you might always want to achieve isn't quite, the journey is often the right way.
The Green Party is so single issue, but it's not credible on anything else.
Well, it's the same as
would seem to me.
No, and it's the same as within the Europe. So there are some people who, we did get a lot of them come into the party, who for them Europe was absolutely the only issue. Rejoin, the EU, like this, and we were like, but we'd like to do that because obviously working with others. But it's not the only, and it's not the most dominant issue for us. There are issues around care, society, healthcare, the environment. I'm just bringing up these things. Europe, yes, it's important, work with them or whatever, but not the only big thing. So that was the big battle.
And of course, it was Clinton who originally said, is the economy stupid? And no matter what all these other issues are, no matter how passionate people are, actually, to use Harold Wilson's phrase, the pound in your pocket is still a major driving force. Now, under PR that you're an advocate for, you got 3.5 million votes, was it, at the 2024 election? And Reform got 4.5 million. So if you had PR, you'd be in a trade-off with someone like Reform potentially, because they ended up with 5 MPs. And what's the dynamic within the Liberal Democrat Party sort of reconciling that challenge?
We still are the hugest advocates for electoral reform. We just don't think our system at the moment, it's not representative of how people feel, and it's not really, it's stable government. It didn't for through the whole period of the Conservatives, and I see there's always going to be an issue over governments and coalitions, because I deal a lot with coalitions and I know the difficulties that they have on trying to bring things forward, etc. But we've actually had debates in Parliament. I think it was the Lib Dems recently who brought that. It went through. It won't go through without the government support, but it actually went through with a lot of support from Labour MPs. We have to challenge and put forward our views on policies and hopefully convince people to support us. I don't think sort of using a system which we don't really regard as being properly democratic as it were, to bring that about. So there's two things there. Of course, we could turn around and say, of course we don't. Let's keep the system as it is now, which is what Labour and the Conservatives.
Well, they have a vested interest.
Well, they are. Labour have said they want to change it, and then every time they win an election, Archie. Every time they win an election, they go, no, we don't.
Yeah, of course not.
But so I've tried to explain to other parties and people. Do you understand that the Labour won 2/3 of the seats on 1/3 of the votes?
Yeah.
Well, that's why whilst they've got those numbers in Parliament, they don't have the huge support to be able to do what they might feel they might want to do.
The MPs themselves don't have an incentive because they would start losing their jobs.
Yeah.
Because some of the seats would go.
Well, they're all
and even if the MPs highly unlikely were in favour of it, the grassroots wouldn't be in favour because they want to see a majority power per party. And it was Rafe Hadelman-Coo, the broadcaster, who said to me the other day when I was interviewing him, he said, the reason we've had 14 years of a right-wing government, a Tory government, is because the left is splintered. Because you've got Plaid Cymru, you've got SNP, you've got the Greens, you've got the Liberals, you've got Labour. And if there was a broad progressive left alliance, actually, and it's interesting because I didn't mention it to him, but I did a tot-up, I think it must have been 2 or maybe 3 elections ago, and I looked at all the votes across the whole country and where the votes had gone, and I looked at it, and a revelation to me. So I went, this country's left-wing. I mean, if you were to tot up all the votes of all the people, the country is more left-wing than right-wing, and yet we end up consistently, good or bad, depending on your point of view, with Conservative governments, because the left is fragmented.
Yeah.
Do you think the left could ever reconcile itself to be a progressive alliance?
We tried that in 2019, and I think that voters should have the right to choose themselves who they want to vote for. I don't believe that parties doing stitch-up deals and whatever is the right way forward. I think that there is a better way of looking at the system, the electoral system, to be able to do so. Stand down in certain seats and allow. I just don't. We as a party don't agree with that. We're very much there's let the electorate decide, and eventually I think that you've got to actually put some faith in that. But the system itself. For us, as we've always said, that we wanted to bring about change with the electoral system, and I think that there are ways of, we've used other proportional, so that people's votes are, so that in the end, the person who wins does feel that they have more of a mandate to be able to do so. At the moment, they're a very slim man, especially if you've got 3 parties vying in the same seat. Each of them probably gets about 1/3 of the vote. Which one is, so 2/3 of the vote are just completely not taken into account.
I think also the electoral cycles have something to do with it. So in Mole Valley, where I live down in Surrey, we had Sir Paul Beresford as a Tory MP for many years. He was known as the absent MP. None of us ever saw him. None of us thought he ever did anything. He retired at the next election. I had some personal dealings with him, didn't find him impressive at all. And then Chris Coghlan got elected. Now, we are the local party, I'm not in the party, but in the local system are quite Lib Dem orientated. But it always had a fantastic Tory majority, 22,000 I think Beresford had at the previous election. Now, of course, there's been a boundary change, but Chris Coghlan has come in, absolute breath of fresh air. And it's been like a miracle. He first of all, he knows how to use social media. He's in the social media the whole time. Dorking has the curious success of having a sinkhole that suddenly appeared in it. And God knows why, we're not a mining area. But anyway, thank you, South East Water or Thames Water or someone. And Chris was on it like a hot potato. And he was on the media in the nextdoor.com and the Facebook group, all the rest of it, constantly communicating with the demands he was making and what he was trying to make happen. And I don't know to the extent to which it really pushed things along, or I think it did get Thames Water to rapidly accelerate financial compensation for the impacted businesses. I think that it has sat on their hands forever, particularly with the financial problems they've got. And I think he was brilliant at doing that. And I think his chances, as a week is a long time in politics, as Wilson said.
Yeah.
But I think his chances of getting re-elected, based on his current track record, pretty strong.
Yeah.
And by the way, Chris, I wrote to your office. I want to do an interview with you. Don't forget that. But I'd love to interview him. I think he made a brilliant maiden speech in the House. Absolutely brilliant.
They have to be. They're very focused on the moment of making sure they get re-elected. But what we were talking earlier about, a lot in our party, people have come up from sort of local communities and representing. It's very. I mean, you all say that. You'll always find somebody. If I said we don't sort of bring people in and impose people, people tend to be from the local area. They've been there. They've involved there. And 90%. That's where most of our candidates will have come from, and that does make a difference. And then there, of course, what is our role? I mean, you mentioned earlier. I would say it very much is. To what we feel at the moment, we want this government, we want the Labour government to succeed.
Well, I think everyone who's a true and proud Englishman should want them to succeed.
And we're trying to nudge them. We are not the ones. You will find in our language that we're not, coming down, personally criticising, whatever. We feel that, but we are disappointed in that they aren't being bolder, and if they don't actually start being, they've got, where are they at the moment? I mean, they've been in 6 months. I gave them a year and a half, so they haven't got very much longer to actually start to take some real.
Yeah, I have to say I'm in a much more critical field than you on that one. I mean, I think they're a disaster with the budget as a business person.
Key decisions.
Beyond my understanding.
No, I know, but they've got to start making some key decisions and being bolder. And we want to try to actually show them that if they do that, they have our support to be able to do so. Then they're going to be looking over their shoulders and whatever. But fiddling around with the planning system, for all the good it's going to do, is not going to bring about the real change to this country to improve public services. And so we're like, and then again, when they're doing that, so the planning system, local government, yes, there probably is a way of being able to make it a bit more efficient. But what we have to be very careful about is it, throwing the baby out with the bathwater by bringing in a sort of these things need to be approved better. What they're going to find out is that the local communities are not being heard and their concerns are not being heard, and it will come back to them. So even on that front, they're sort of making a mistake
and pretending that building a third of Heathrow runway is going to help growth. That's 20 years off. It's ridiculous. David, you have been a star. You have had more airtime today than poor Ed Davey had during the election across all the networks.
Oh, right?
So I send him my sympathies, and I give you my congratulations for being so engaging. Your passion for politics and the party is brilliant, and I think a lot of people who will watch this, and I hope a lot of people do watch it, will understand much more about the mission of the Liberal Democrats as a result of today. So, David, thank you.
No, thank you.